Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today by asking you to do something that, well, it might feel a little uncomfortable. I want you to take a quick inventory of the inside of your head, right now.
Oh, boy.
Not the polished version, the one you tell your friends about, or the organized one you present in a meeting. I'm talking about the raw feed, the background noise.
That's a dangerous place to look for most people.
It is, isn't it? If you're anything like me, it's not a neat, tidy library. It's more like a construction site next to a playground, next to a debate club that's on fire. You've got a replay of an embarrassing thing you said in 2014, a vague anxiety about an email you haven't sent yet. You've got a song stuck on a loop, and of course a running commentary on how much you really need a coffee. It is a mess.
It's the universal human condition, really. The messy mind. And the source material we are covering today argues that this mess, this chaos, it isn't just annoying, it's expensive.
How?
It costs us energy, it costs us time, and frankly, it costs us our happiness.
So, today we are diving deep into a book called Think Straight, Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life by Darius Foroux. Now, I have to be honest with you right out of the gate. When I first saw that title, Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life, my skepticism meter went through the roof.
Mine too, absolutely.
It sounds like a bumper sticker you'd see on a van in California. It feels a bit fluffy, a bit just manifest it.
I had the exact same reaction. It just screams generic self-help. But having gone through the material, I think that initial reaction is, well, it's wrong. This isn't a book about positive thinking or, vibes.
Okay.
It is essentially a modern, tactical manual on the philosophy of pragmatism, and I mean that in the big philosophical sense, with a capital P.
That is the distinction we need to make right up front, then. We are not talking about thinking happy thoughts. We're not talking about ignoring problems.
Not at all. We are talking about utility. We are talking about the mechanics of how a thought actually functions. Is it doing a job, or is it just taking up space?
And the author, Darius Foroux, he's not an academic philosopher sitting in an ivory tower.
No, not at all. He's an entrepreneur, a blogger, a podcaster. He's a guy who operates in the real world, in the real economy. He apparently wrote this because he found that most books on thinking fall into one of two traps.
Which are?
They are either these dense academic philosophy texts that, you need a PhD to decode, or they are that vague woo-woo spirituality that feels good for a minute, but offers you zero actual tools. You wanted a toolkit.
A practical toolkit. And the core image of the book, the visual hook that really, really grabbed me, is so simple. I want you to just visualize this for a second. On the left side of the page, you have a scribbled, chaotic knot.
Right.
It looks like a toddler took a black Sharpie and just went to town. Loops, jagged edges, a total mess. That, he says, is our mind by default.
That is the state of entropy. Just chaos.
And on the right side, there's a straight line. Just a clean, sharp arrow pointing directly to a target. The mission of this deep dive, really, is to figure out how to get from that scribble to the straight line.
And the premise Foroux lays out it's bold. He suggests that 99% of the thoughts that are occupying that scribble, they're useless.
99%?
99. They're just noise.
That's a confronting statistic. I mean, if 99% of our mental processing power is just waste, that means we are operating at, 1% efficiency?
Exactly. Imagine if your car or your laptop ran at 1% efficiency. You'd throw it in the trash.
You would, absolutely. But we can't throw our brains in the trash, so we have to, fix the software?
We have to fix the software. And to do that, Foroux takes us on this pretty wild narrative journey. He blends his own very modern stress, trying to survive as an entrepreneur, with the existential crisis of a 19th century philosopher named William James.
It is a fascinating pairing. It's not something you see every day. You don't often see a book jump from I can't find an apartment in London to, the father of American psychology contemplating suicide in 1869.
But the connection really works. It grounds this old philosophy in a really modern, relatable problem.
So let's start there. Let's go back to 1869. Because to understand why thinking straight is so hard and so necessary, we really have to understand the trap that William James was in.
We really do. So picture William James. He's about 27 years old. He has just graduated from Harvard with a medical degree. On paper, on paper, he is the absolute definition of elite success.
Right. Ivy League, doctor, from a good family.
Exactly. He comes from a wealthy, incredibly intellectual family. His father was a famous theologian. His brother, Henry James, would become one of the greatest novelists ever. He should be on top of the world.
But the reality was very, very different. The sources describe a man who is essentially broken.
It was dark. I mean, truly dark. James was in the middle of a profound crisis of meaning. He was actively suicidal. He was plagued by panic attacks, by hallucinations, and this deep, crushing depression. And this wasn't just, a bad mood.
This was debilitating.
Totally. He was unable to function. He couldn't practice medicine. He could barely leave his room for months on end.
And a big part of this, which I found fascinating, was that he felt his condition was completely inevitable. His father had struggled with very similar mental health issues. So James looked at his father, looked at himself, and connected the dots in the worst possible way.
He fell right into the trap of biological determinism. You have to remember, this is the late 19th century. Science was just exploding. Darwin had published On the Origin of Species only a decade earlier.
So the scientific world was starting to see everything through this new biological lens.
Exactly. The scientific community was starting to view the human body as a machine, a collection of chemicals and biological impulses. So James believed he was just a biological machine with broken parts. He thought, my father was miserable, my biology is inherited, therefore I am destined to be miserable.
It's a terrifying thought loop to get stuck in. Because if you truly believe your misery is hardwired into your DNA, or just the result of, I don't know, chemical dominoes falling over in your brain, why bother trying to change?
What's the point?
Right. It's like trying to change the color of your eyes by wishing it. You feel completely and utterly powerless.
Exactly. He felt he had no agency, no free will. He was just a passenger, an observer of his own decay. But the turning point, and this is the moment that essentially gave birth to the philosophy of pragmatism, came in 1870. James was reading an essay by a French philosopher named Charles Renouvier.
And Renouvier had a definition of free will that it cracked the door open for James. It wasn't a big, grand scientific definition. It was almost a behavioral one.
It was. Renouvier defined free will as the sustaining of a thought because I choose to when I might have other thoughts.
Okay, let's parse that. The sustaining of a thought. That feels like a very, very specific choice of words.
It's a subtle but massive distinction. Renouvier wasn't saying you can stop thoughts from appearing in your mind. You can't.
So you can't just put up a firewall and block negative thoughts.
No. Thoughts float into our consciousness like clouds, or, to use a more modern analogy, like pop-up ads on a sketchy website. You can't stop the pop-up ad from appearing on your screen. But, and this is the absolute key, you can choose whether or not to click on it. You can choose whether to sustain it.
So James realized he couldn't stop the depressing thoughts, the suicidal thoughts from entering his brain. The chemicals would do what they do, but he could choose not to. Not to invite them in for tea, he could choose not to focus on them.
Precisely. He realized that while consciousness is a stream he can't control, his attention is a spotlight he can't. He's the one holding the spotlight. And he wrote in a journal, this is a very famous entry from April 30, 1870, "My first act of free will shall be to believe in free will."
It's so meta, it's almost a paradox. I choose to believe I have a choice.
It is a paradox. But it broke the loop. It was a conscious decision to reject determinism. It shifted him from being a passive victim of his own biology to an active operator of his own mind. He decided that if he believed in free will, he could act as if he had it, and that action itself would change his reality.
And it did. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. He went on to become one of the most productive and influential thinkers in American history.
He absolutely did. The man who could barely leave his room became a giant.
And this is the philosophical foundation of the book we're covering today. Foroux argues that we are all, in some way, William James. Maybe not to that suicidal extreme, but we all let these intrusive, useless, negative thoughts set up camp in our heads, and we treat them as facts. We treat them as inevitable.
We treat them as guests of honor when we should be treating them as spam. Just mark as junk and move on.
Okay, so Foroux brings this concept into the 21st century with a story that's a little less life or death than William James, but honestly, it's very relatable for anyone who has ever moved to a big city. He calls it the London story.
Right, the London story. It's a classic modern example of the scribbled mind in full-blown action.
So let's set the scene. Foroux decides to move from the Netherlands to London in 2014. He has the dream, right? Big city, big opportunities, the hustle, all of it. He packs his entire life into a van.
And his parents are there to help him move, which, let's be honest, is already a high-stress situation for anyone.
Absolutely. So he drives across the channel. He thinks he has it all sorted. He's going to meet the landlady, get the keys, move in, order a pizza. Simple. Done.
And then, of course, the reality of the big city hits him like a ton of bricks.
Yeah.
The day before the move, he gets a call. The landlady cancels.
The ultimate nightmare scenario. Just, sorry, change my mind. Click.
Total nightmare. So now he's sitting in this cramped little hotel room with his parents. The van is parked outside, stuffed with everything he owns. He has nowhere to live in a city of 7-8 million people. And he spirals.
And he describes this spiral so vividly. He says he panicked big time, but notice where his mind went. He didn't just think, okay, this is a logistical problem, I need a room.
No.
His mind immediately turned inward and started attacking him. I'm an idiot. I've ruined everything. I dragged my poor parents into this mess. Why does this kind of thing always happen to me?
That is the scribble. That is the knot. He spent hours in that hotel room essentially beating himself up. He was over-dramatizing what was, at its core, a solvable problem. He was layering this huge, useless emotional narrative on top of a simple logistical glitch.
He even admits later it was a total first world problem. You know, he had money for a hotel. He wasn't literally going to be on the street. He had a van. But inside his head, it felt like the apocalypse.
And then he has his aha moment, his William James moment. He forces himself to stop, to think straight. He visualizes that straight line we talked about, and he asks himself one very specific, very pragmatic question. Is this worry finding me an apartment?
The answer to which, obviously, is no. Worrying has never once signed a lease agreement.
Right. Worrying is not a search engine. It doesn't produce useful results. So he shifted. He stopped engaging with the I'm an idiot thought. He stopped sustaining it, just like William James taught. And he focused his attention on the useful thought. Where can I sleep tonight?
So he went on Airbnb, booked a place for a week, problem solved.
And the kicker to the story. The landlady called him back a few days later, apologized profusely, said there was a misunderstanding with her family, and he got the original apartment anyway.
So that entire night of panic, self-hatred, and stress...
It was literally for nothing. It burned a ton of energy and achieved absolutely zero.
And that brings us to the central filter of the entire book, the distinction between useful and useless thoughts. Now, I want to challenge this a little bit, because Foroux says 99% of thoughts are useless. That feels incredibly high.
It does.
And also, isn't some worry useful? You know? If I'm worried about a bear in the woods, that worry makes me run away. That seems pretty useful. If I'm worried about my mom being sick, that feels like love, not waste.
That's a great pushback, and it's a really important clarification to make. Foroux isn't saying we should be unfeeling robots. He's not advocating for apathy. He is leaning very heavily on the Stoics here, specifically a philosopher named Epictetus. He draws a hard, pragmatic line based on utility.
Right.
According to his system, useful thoughts fall into only two categories.
Yeah.
Just two.
Only two? That seems incredibly restrictive.
It is, but that's what makes it such a powerful filter. Okay, so category one, thinking about how to solve a problem. A problem is just an unanswered question. If you are actively strategizing, planning, or calculating a solution, like Foroux booking the Airbnb, that is useful.
So that's the running from the bear thought, or the I should call the doctor for my mom thought.
Correct. It's action-oriented thinking. It moves you towards a solution.
Yeah.
Now, category two, internalizing knowledge. If you were reading a book and you're really trying to understand a concept, or if you're looking back at a mistake you made to extract a specific actionable lesson so you don't repeat it, that is useful. That is understanding the world.
And everything else, all the other stuff floating around in there is the 99%.
Everything else is the 99%.
Okay, give me some examples of the everything else, because I feel like I have a lot of everything else.
Well, let's look at the most common ones he lists. Worrying about the future without having a concrete plan. Useless. Ruminating on the past without extracting a lesson. You know, just replaying the tape of, I shouldn't have said that over and over and over.
Useless.
Useless. Fantasizing about a different life without taking any actual steps to get there. Useless. And the big one, the one that probably powers half the internet, wondering what other people think of you.
Oof. That last one hits hard. I feel like 50% of my brain power on any given day goes to, I hope they like that email, or did I sound stupid in that meeting, or why did that person look at me like that?
And Foroux, basically just channeling Epictetus here, would say that is 100% waste. It's a total waste of energy. And the reason is the dichotomy of control.
The dichotomy of control. Break that down.
It's a core Stoic idea. It says the world is divided into two parts. Things you can control and things you can't. You only control your desires, your actions, your words, and your intentions. That's it. That's the whole list.
And everything else.
Everything else, the economy, the weather, traffic, and crucially, other people's opinions of you, is outside of your control. So you must learn to discard any thought that focuses on what you can't control.
So if I'm sitting there agonizing for an hour over whether my boss liked my presentation, I'm burning fuel to heat a house I don't even live in.
That is a fantastic analogy. Yes, you are burning fuel to heat a house you don't live in. The useful thought is, did I prepare as well as I could have? Did I deliver my best effort? You can answer those questions. You can control those things. The boss's opinion is in their head. You have no jurisdiction there. The thought, I hope they like me, solves nothing. It changes nothing. Therefore, by this strict definition, it is useless.
This is very liberating, but it's ruthless. It requires you to constantly audit your own mind. It feels like you have to hire a bouncer to stand at the door of your own mental club.
It does. It's a discipline. And it's the core of that pragmatist maxim we mentioned earlier from William James. The true is that which works.
The true is that which works.
Yeah. We usually think of truth with a capital T as being objective. Water is H2O. That's a fact. But in pragmatism, truth is instrumental.
Truth is instrumental. Unpack that a bit more.
It means, does this belief or this thought produce a good, useful result in my life? If a thought, even a thought that might be factually true, makes you miserable, keeps you stuck, and solves nothing, then for the purpose of your lived experience, that thought is false. It's a glitch. It isn't working for you.
Foroux gives that great personal example of this regarding his move to London. He went there because he held a certain truth in his mind, which was, big cities offer more opportunity.
Right. That's a cultural truth. We all sort of believe that, don't we? It's the narrative. If you want to make it, you've got to go to New York, go to London, go to Tokyo.
But for him, personally, it didn't work. He found that he hated the crowds, he hated the insane cost of living, he hated the pollution, he was genuinely miserable. So for him, the truth of the big city was actually a lie. It wasn't working.
Exactly. So he did something that most people would consider a step backwards. He did something brave. He moved back to a place called Leeuwarden in the Netherlands. It's a small city, much, much cheaper, close to his family. And guess what happened?
His business grew faster. He was happier.
His business grew faster, and he was happier. So for him, the pragmatic truth was small city equals success.
That requires a lot of courage, though, to look at what society tells you is the right path and to say, nah, this isn't working for me. It forces you to define success on your own terms, not on society's terms.
It requires trusting your own data over society's assumptions. And that brings us to the next big hurdle in all of this. We want to trust our own data, but our data collection machine, our own brain, is incredibly buggy.
The glitches in the machine. Foroux is not a fan of the human brain's default settings.
He is not, and he has a lot of science to back him up. He points out that psychologists, most famously Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, have identified over 100 cognitive biases. Our brains are teeming with built-in errors.
So we are not logical Spocks. We are irrational homers.
We're irrational homers, absolutely. And he focuses on a couple of specific biases that are particularly good at preventing us from thinking straight. The first one he talks about is attentional bias.
Attentional bias.
This is the scientific backing for that old phrase, you become what you think about. Attentional bias means that your perception of reality is actively filtered by what you are focusing on at any given moment.
It's like the classic red car effect. You decide you want to buy a red car, and then all of a sudden you see red cars on every single street. They were always there, but you never saw them before.
Exactly. Now apply that to your life problems. If you constantly focus on how difficult and annoying your job is, your brain, specifically a part called the reticular activating system, will start to scan your environment for evidence that you're right. You will notice every rude email, every project delay, every minor annoyance. You will literally create a reality where your job is hell because you are filtering out anything that isn't hell.
So you're filtering out the good stuff, you don't see the supportive colleague who helped you, or the one interesting project you got to work on, because your radar is only set to detect annoyance.
Foroux's argument is that our reality is highly subjective. We are painting it with the brush of our attention. If you think your life is hard and unfair, your brain will dutifully provide you with 1,000 pieces of evidence to prove that you are absolutely right.
And that leads directly into the big villain of rational thinking, confirmation bias.
The true enemy of the straight line. Confirmation bias is our deep-seated tendency to seek out and favor information that confirms what we already believe and to reject facts that don't fit our narrative.
So if you believe I am just not good with money and you lose $10, your brain goes, see, I knew it, proof.
But if you save $100, your brain says, oh, that was just luck, that doesn't count. You actively dismiss the evidence that proves you wrong. We don't look for objective facts. We look for reassurance that our prejudices are correct.
This leads to a section of the book that I think everyone, and I mean everyone, needs to hear. The difference between facts and assumptions. Foroux says he hates assumptions, yet he catches himself making them constantly.
We all do. It's a cognitive shortcut. The brain is lazy. It loves efficiency.
Yeah.
He didn't text back, so he must be angry with me. That's an assumption. It saves the brain the energy of actually finding out the truth.
Or the client hasn't replied to my email, so they must have hated the proposal.
Classic assumption.
He quotes Nietzsche here, which is pretty heavy. He says, "There are no facts, only interpretations," which sounds a bit trippy, a bit postmodern.
It is deep,
Yeah.
but the practical application is vital for thinking straight. Since we know our brains are these unreliable, bias-filled machines, we have to stop trusting our first interpretation of events. We have to replace our guesses with tests.
Replace guesses with tests. I like that. It's so simple. So instead of spiraling for hours because you assume Wimby is angry, you just pick up the phone and ask.
Exactly. Relying on assumptions is like trying to build a house on a swamp. It's unstable thinking. You have to drive piles down to the bedrock of actual facts. Did he say he was angry? No. Then you don't actually know. Did the client officially reject the proposal? No. Then you don't know. The straight thinker waits for the data. The scribbled thinker invents the data to feed their anxiety.
Speaking of waiting, let's talk about speed. Because we live in a culture that absolutely worships the fast thinker. The person in the meeting who has the snap answer is always seen as the leader. The person who tweets their hot take 30 seconds after the news breaks gets all the likes. But Foroux says, slow down.
He really challenges this myth of the fast thinker. He argues that your first thought, that snap judgment, that gut reaction, is usually garbage.
Garbage, that's strong.
Well, his point is that it's emotional, it's biased, or it's just an outdated script running in your head. It comes from the fast part of your brain, the lizard brain, that is designed for immediate survival, not for long-term strategy.
He uses the example of Darius to illustrate this point. I'm a big fan of Darius. He founded CD Baby. He's a very original thinker.
Severs is the anti-reactionary. He shared this story about getting completely overwhelmed with emails. He had sold his company, he was famous in the tech world, and he was getting thousands and thousands of people asking him for just 5 minutes of advice. And his fast, emotional brain just screamed, shut it all down, go off the grid, become a monk in New Zealand.
Which is a very binary reaction. It's all or nothing. It's fight or flight.
Exactly. It's an extreme solution to a nuanced problem. But Severs didn't act on it. He engaged in slow thinking. He let the problem just sit there. He slept on it for a few days, and eventually he found a much better middle ground solution. I will stay online, but I just won't answer questions. I'll continue to post my thoughts and essays, but I'm going to remove my contact form.
A nuanced solution, not all or nothing.
Right. If he had acted on his fast thought, he would have destroyed his connection to his audience. By thinking slowly, he found a way to keep the connection without the burden. He found a third way.
There is so much power in just being comfortable saying, I don't know, or let me think about that and get back to you. We feel this immense pressure to answer now, but usually, nobody dies if we answer tomorrow.
It creates space. And we need that space to avoid what Foroux calls the future yes.
Oh, God, the future yes. I am such a victim of this. I do this all the time.
I think we all do. It's a classic cognitive trap. Someone asks you to, say, speak at a conference or go to a wedding or help with a move, and it's 6 months from now.
Right.
You look at your calendar for next July, it's totally empty. You feel rich in time. It seems infinitely far away. So you say, sure, of course, I'd love to.
Because the pain of actually doing the thing feels very far away. It's abstract. It doesn't feel real.
Right. But then 6 months rolls around. Now your life is busy, you're tired, you have deadlines, and suddenly you have to get on a plane and fly across the country to do this thing you really don't want to do anymore. You have cursed your future self because your past self didn't think straight in the present.
So what's the straight thinking fix? How do we stop sabotaging our future selves?
The fix is a simple but powerful mental rule. Would I do this tomorrow? If someone asked you to do this exact same thing tomorrow morning, would you say yes? If the honest answer is no, I'm way too busy, or I really don't want to, then the answer should be no for 6 months from now too.
That is such a good rule of thumb. It's brilliant. It forces you to feel the cost of the time immediately, not in some abstract future.
It saves a lot of regret. It aligns your present self with your future self, which is a key part of thinking straight.
Now, speaking of regret and burnout, Foroux talks about the learning curve and hitting the wall. He describes a time where he was trying to learn so much and write so much that he literally fried his brain.
This is so relatable for anyone who goes through these bursts of intense work or study. He was reading and writing for like 12 hours a day, just cramming information in. And then suddenly he started getting these intense headaches. He couldn't focus. He felt like he was having a mental breakdown.
And I think we've all been conditioned to just push through the pain in those moments, just grind harder, drink more coffee.
Yeah.
The whole hustle culture tells us that stopping is for losers. But he says that is exactly the wrong move.
It's the wrong move because the brain doesn't learn linearly. It doesn't work like that. It learns in steps. When you hit that wall, that feeling of frustration, that mental fog, it's not a sign of failure. It's a signal that your brain's buffer is full. Your brain needs time to write the data to the hard drive, so to speak.
So what's the solution? Just stop, walk away.
Disengage completely. And not with more productive stuff. He talks about listening to Jay-Z or Bon Iver, watching mindless movies, not productive relaxation, just completely checking out. You have to let the background processing of your brain take over. If you try to smash through that wall with sheer force, you just end up hurting yourself. You have to let the wall dissolve on its own.
I like that image, letting the wall dissolve. It suggests that rest isn't the opposite of work. It's actually an essential part of the work itself.
Exactly. The consolidation of knowledge happens when you're not trying.
Okay, let's get a bit unconventional. Part 5 of our deep dive is called The Exit is Outside the Box. And he uses a maze analogy here that I thought was just brilliant.
It's a great visual to understand how we trap ourselves with conventional thinking. So imagine a maze, like on a restaurant placemat. We're all running around inside the maze, turning left, turning right, hitting dead ends. We are desperately trying to find the center because we think the cheese, the prize, the happiness, the success is always in the center.
But Foroux says in life, the check mark, the actual goal, is often located outside the maze entirely.
Meaning, we are playing by a set of rules that don't actually get us what we want. We are following convention when convention is the trap. And one of the biggest conventions he attacks is the classic pros and cons list.
Poor Benjamin Franklin. He basically invented the pros and cons list, and Foroux just comes in and tears it apart.
Well, the critique is really valid when you think about it. A pros and cons list forces you into binary thinking. It forces you to look at a decision as do A or do B. It completely ignores the complexity of real life. It assumes there are only two paths forward.
He gives the example of relationships. If you make a pros and cons list for breaking up with someone, it's always the same predictable stuff. Pro, freedom. Con, loneliness. It doesn't actually help you feel the right answer. It just lists your biggest fears and desires.
And in career terms, the list is usually quit my stable job or start a risky business. Foroux advocates for what he calls abundance thinking. Why does it have to be OR? Why not keep my job and D, start the business on the side?
That's the outside the maze thinking.
Yes. The maze says you have to choose a path. The straight thinker says, what if I can climb over the wall? It's about rejecting the false choices that society often presents to us as the only options.
He applies this same kind of straight thinking to money, too. And I have to say, I appreciate his money rules because they're delightfully boring. But they're so effective.
They're simple, and that's precisely why they work. They're not some complicated scheme.
Okay, so rule 1, don't buy shit you don't need. Rule 2, save at least 10% of your income. Rule 3, stay out of debt. Rule 4, invest in things that have a return. But rule 5 is the one I really want to discuss. Don't be stingy.
That's the nuance, right? He follows all these frugal rules with, it's just money.
How does that fit with don't buy shit you don't need? It feels almost contradictory at first.
It's not. If you understand the pragmatic definition of value, he makes a really important distinction between being wasteful and being cheap. Being wasteful is buying a new gadget you never use. That's bad. But being cheap is buying a $300 laptop that crashes every day when you rely on it for your job. That, he says, is false economy.
So buying a $3,000 MacBook is actually straight thinking if it helps you earn $10,000 more a year.
Exactly. A pragmatist looks at the value, not just the cost. If a tool helps you produce more, the cost is an investment, not an expense. If an object is just useless clutter, then any cost, even $1, is too high. He emphasizes investing in your skills and your tools. A laptop is a tool to create value. A course that teaches you a new skill is a tool to create value. Skimping on your tools is just skimping on your own future.
I want to talk about mistakes. Because even if we think straight, we are all human, we mess up. And Foroux shares a story about a mistake he made that made me physically cringe, the $150,000 typo.
The whim A and whim B incident. It's painful just to talk about. It's every freelancer's nightmare.
So let's play it out. He's emailing a contract. He has 2 contacts in his email named Whim. Whim A is a loyal, long-term client who gets a massive discount because of their history together. Whim B is a brand new prospect who is supposed to pay full price. He's in a hurry. He uses autocomplete.
And he sends the heavily discounted contract meant for whim A to the new prospect, whim B.
And the prospect, Whim B, sees this lower price intended for someone else, gets offended that he's being overcharged relative to this other person, assumes he's being ripped off, and cancels the entire deal on the spot.
$150,000. Gone. In a second. Because he was lazy with autocomplete.
Now, the scribbled mind would absolutely spiral here. I'm so stupid, I should just quit. I'm a failure. I ruin everything.
But Foroux forces himself to use that useful filter we talked about. The question, why am I such a loser, is a useless question. It has no answer other than shame. The question, how do I prevent this from ever happening again, is the useful one. And the answer isn't self-hatred. The answer is a simple system, a checklist. From now on, I will double-check the recipient field every single time, or I will never use autocomplete for important contracts.
It goes back to that idea that big picture thinking doesn't excuse you from sweating the small details.
Absolutely. In fact, straight thinking requires a deep respect for details. He even talks about the book's title. It went through 3 major iterations. First, it was the art of practicality, which is kind of boring.
Yeah, a bit dry.
Then it was the power of pragmatic thinking, which sounds like a textbook. And finally, after a lot of thought, they landed on think straight.
Which is punchy, it's visual, and it promises a clear benefit. That one small detail probably changed the entire destiny of the book.
But there is a balance. And this is the final tension in the book that he tries to resolve. You need to think straight, you need to be deliberate, but you absolutely cannot let thinking stop you from acting. His rule is, action is greater than thinking.
This is the grandmother's lesson, as he calls it.
Yes. He talks about how his grandmother lives with a lot of regret. She would always talk about the past, about things she wished she had done differently. She had sacrificed a lot for her family, moving countries and so on. But she lived her life in the past tense. She was always looking in the rearview mirror. And Foroux took that to heart. You don't regret the mistake you made, like the whim email, nearly as much as you regret the shot you didn't take.
And he shares a failure of his own to prove this point. A membership site he launched, he had this big goal. He wanted to get 1,000 members. He got 78.
And this is a masterclass in avoiding the sunk cost fallacy. He had worked really hard on it. He built the website. He wrote all the content. He had spent months of his life on this project.
Yeah.
But after 6 weeks of it being live, he looked at the data. The math just didn't work. The growth wasn't there.
Most people in that situation would just grind for another year, trying to make it work because they've already put so much time and effort in.
Exactly. I can't quit now. I've come this far. That's the emotional, scribbled mind talking. That's thinking about the past investment. The straight mind looks at the future trajectory and says, based on this data, this is not the most effective use of my time going forward. He pulled the plug in 6 weeks.
That looks like failure to the outside world, but from his perspective, it was a huge success.
It was a massive success because he freed up his time and energy for things that did work.
That is such a hard thing to do, though, to kill your darlings like that.
It is. But that's the discipline of thinking straight. It's about being loyal to the result, not the effort.
Let's move to the final part of the book, finding inner calm. He has a very no-nonsense take on meditation.
He does. His take on meditation is very pragmatic, unsurprisingly. He says you don't need the yoga mats, you don't need the incense, or a fancy app with a soothing voice.
So what's the method?
The method is, sit down, observe the thoughts that float by, ignore them. That's it. You just watch the traffic of your mind without getting in the car. The goal isn't to have no thoughts. The goal is to realize you are not your thoughts. The goal is inner calm.
And he wraps up the entire book by bringing us back to where we started, back to William James. And this final story, honestly, it gave me chills. It brings the whole concept of pragmatism full circle in a really beautiful way.
It is a beautiful, redemptive story. And it involves William James and his forgotten friend, Charles Sanders Peirce.
Who was Peirce? I have to admit, I hadn't heard of him before this book.
And that's the point. Most people haven't. Peirce was a certified genius, a brilliant logician. In many ways, he was the intellectual architect behind pragmatism. He and James essentially founded the philosophy together in their youth. But while James's life took off and he became a Harvard legend, Peirce's life completely fell apart.
What happened?
He was a difficult person, apparently very arrogant, but the real issue was a scandal. He lived with a woman he wasn't married to, which was an absolute career ender in the strict moral code of the late 1800s. He was blacklisted from academia. He ended up totally destitute, literally homeless on the streets of New York, eating scraps of food to survive.
The genius on the street. It's such a tragic figure.
It is. Meanwhile, William James is a global celebrity. He's the most famous psychologist in America. And in 1898, James gives a major lecture at Berkeley. The whole world is watching. And instead of taking sole credit for the philosophy of pragmatism, which he easily could have done because Pierce was completely forgotten,
He credits Pierce.
he credits Pierce. In front of everyone, he revives his friend's name. He uses his massive platform to lift his old friend out of obscurity. He acknowledges that the core idea came from this man who society had thrown away. He even went on to arrange for a fund to support Pierce financially in his old age so he wouldn't starve.
And Foroux asks the question, so what? What's the lesson there? Why does this story matter for thinking straight?
The lesson is that the ultimate use of clear thinking isn't just about personal productivity. It isn't just about making more money or finding an apartment or avoiding typos. The ultimate goal is being useful to other people. Darius realized that the most pragmatic thing he could do, the thing that worked best, that created the most good in the world, was to be a good friend, to use his success to help someone else.
The greatest use of a life is to spend it on something that will outlast it.
That's the quote he ends with, and it elevates the whole conversation. We think straight not just to clear our own mess, but so that we have the capacity to clear the way for others. If your mind is a total mess, you can't help anyone. You're too busy drowning in your own scribble. But if your mind is a straight line, you can be a lifeline for someone else.
It's a beautiful place to land the whole deep dive. So let's just recap this journey quickly. We started with the chaos, the scribbled, tangled knot in all of our heads.
We learned that we cannot control the thoughts that enter our minds, but we have absolute free will to choose which thoughts we sustain. That is our superpower.
We learned the ruthless but effective filter. Is this thought useful? Is it helping me solve a problem, or is it helping me learn? If the answer is no, it's out.
We learned to distrust our glitchy, biased brains, to check our assumptions against hard facts, and to think slow when the world is screaming at us to think fast.
We learned to step outside the maze, to reject the false binary choices society gives us, and to act decisively, even if that action is to quit something that isn't working.
And finally, we learned that the ultimate goal of all this mental clarity is to find inner calm so we can be of use to others.
So here's the final thought I want to leave all of you with. Foroux suggests we look at our lives and ask a really provocative question. Are you living inside the maze, running around in circles, trying to find the cheese in the middle? Or are you brave enough to draw a straight line right through the walls?
And, maybe more importantly, are you spending your precious mental energy asking, why is this happening to me? Which is a useless, past-oriented question. Or are you asking, how do I move forward from here? Which is the useful, future-oriented question.
The switch from why to how, that's the straight line. Thank you for diving deep with us today. Go straighten out those thoughts. We'll see you next time.